Thank you, Chairman Tonko. Administrator Regan, I wanted to talk about Superfund and Brownfields. The EPA budget request calls for increases in funding for both programs, which I support, especially given the Superfund backlog. And, this is something that has been involved with New Jersey members and this committee for so long. I'm always giving out history lessons, but Jim Florio, who was my predecessor on the committee, sponsored the Superfund. Senator Lautenberg was a Senate sponsor, and the Brownfields program was the idea of Administrator Whitman, who was the governor of New Jersey, Republican, before she became administrator of the EPA, and Paul Gilmore, a Republican member, myself, were the ones that sponsored the original Brownfields federal program. So how will the requested increase for Superfund impact the backlog that exists? And would you commit to working with Congress to get these backlog cleanups started? That's my first question.
The answer is yes, absolutely. There's an $882 million request in there to really begin to chip away at that backlog of 45 projects. And so we will earnestly work to chip away at that backlog, but we also have to be reminded that in addition to the FY22 ask, in the Americans Jobs Plan, there's another $5 billion request for Superfund and Brownfield sites as well. So our budget request is the beginning of what we need to do to earnestly begin to look at cleaning up Superfund sites.
Well, thank you so much. Now, it's also important to me that polluters pay the cost of these cleanups, and that's why I reintroduced the Superfund Polluter Pays Act to reinstate the Superfund tax. And obviously that was included in the president's American Jobs Plan as well, to bring back the tax. So can you talk very briefly about why reinstating the tax, what reinstating the tax would mean for the Superfund program, and how would the program be improved by reestablishing a dedicated significant funding stream?
When we look at the number of Superfund sites all across this country, they're in all of our backyards. And so the projects right now exceed the revenue. And the president has supported in the American Jobs Plan the tax. Listen, we believe that this requires an all hands on deck. In our 2022 budget request, there are resources. There's the tax implication here that could provide a revenue stream. And then there's the American Jobs Plan. We know that if we clean up these Superfund sites, that we'll be putting people back to work, but more importantly, we will be restoring these lands so that they can be competitive once again for economic development and community vitality. And so this is extremely important that we have all of these legs of the stool.
And let me ask you this, like so many of these environmental challenges, climate change threatens to make the risk from Superfund sites even worse, and many of the communities around the Superfund sites now live in fear of the toxic releases, from another hurricane or extreme weather event. I know a lot of environmental justice communities are near these Superfund and Brownfield sites, and this is something that you've championed, addressing the concerns of environmental justice communities. So do you agree that climate change makes it even more imperative that we get these sites cleaned up? That's my question.
Absolutely. And you will see a reflection in the budget. Climate change permeates through Superfund, brownfields, water infrastructure. We have to make sure that we are rebuilding a resilient community in all of these areas to reduce the threats that we're facing.
And I know that, obviously you want to work with us to clean up these sites, but I just want a sort of a pledge from you, if you will, that you and other agencies, would really prioritize these sites that are vulnerable to climate change, if you will.
I can commit that to you, Chairman.
And I really appreciate your being here and your support of so many of these things, particularly Superfund and Brownfields. The problem, as you know, is that if we don't have a Superfund tax, then the costs continue to be borne in many cases by the taxpayer through their income tax. I mean, you would agree with that, certainly, correct?
Yes, I would. And
I just don't want that to be the case. I think that the cost should be borne by the polluters and by the chemical and petroleum industry, and not by taxpayers with their income tax. So thanks again for all your support, and I know you're doing a great job. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.